and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Warbo's most rowdy work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we are here with some guests. That's right, it's the Eurovision edition of Power Reflections. Welcome, guests.
Hello, I'm Megafire and I'm from the Netherlands.
Hello, I'm LapsedClassist and I'm from Italy.
And then also the White Duke was going to be here but had to pull out last minute, unfortunately. So
yes,
the scheduling for this one unfortunately got in the way. But yeah, he's Australian too, I think. So an overrepresentation of Australians is very on brand for the Eurovision, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're here to talk about Wild Abandon. Let's get into it first with an Ark Summary, shall we? Just so we can remind people of what happened this arc. In 18.1, the Kenneteers have won the fight against Musa, and he prepares to slink off with his tail between his legs. But Verona can't help but get in a parting shot or two. The invaders start to clear out, but they stop clearing out pretty quickly when it becomes apparent that things in Canada are not doing so hot.
Yeah, and so then as we all come to terms with Chuck's new normal, Avery heads back to her parents' place and sticks some gremlins on the rest of her family to make sure they don't leave till she knows what's up. She tries to talk to her newly awarified mum and also Jazz and Lucy while she's sort of drowning in emails before giving up on the emails and piling on instead to talk to the rest of the trapped Musa practitioners. It doesn't go well. There's a lot of infighting. The Legendaries are bitching about how they were underfunded, but somehow they still feel like the baddies. And then America sort of turns full villain and retreats to the Undercity. And Avery's getting pretty overwhelmed, but Snowdrop saves the day by getting her some time with Nora.
And then in 18.A, our first interlude of the arc, we see three very different origin stories as Luna Hare is sent on errands that see her navigating entirely new places, and she has her first run-ins with practitioners outside the Kenneth found safe zone. The Bittersweet Witch solves some other people's problems while looking for an answer to her own, and Don Driscoll is giving an offer his family can't refuse.
Yep. In 18.3, Avery and Elizabeth do some teeth-clenched negotiations and then some less teeth-clenched teamwork as they save Zed and the Ogres from enthusiastic tea aficionados. The Garricks are invited to ferry away the more reasonable invaders and also show Avery's parents a normal practitioner family, for given values of normal. This good mood is sadly spoiled when Chuck crashes the meeting fashionably late.
Yeah. 18.4 opens on the third component of Verona's domain claim, featuring a cast of charming characters, but also Eastern. We proceed to see a confrontation between the Kenneteers and the Carmine Exile, featuring the parents. Verona encourages Charles to monologue about the next few steps of his master plan. Then in 18.5, Lucy reflects on the pointless cruelty she's endured in her life. Then, completely unrelated, continues the conversation with Charles. Edith attempts to brute force her way back into Matthew's life, but is caught between a rock and a hard place. Lucy pledges to use her righteous fury to fuck up some folks.
That's time for our second interlude with 18.B. The B stands for Best Goblin. Biscuit is wheeling and dealing on her skateboard, coasting her way through life, setting up a shop in Kenneth Found, avoiding the authorities as she does so. And she's just generally running around helping people with their problems, if you squint at it. After trading some tips and philosophizing with Miles Sutton, our lumpy little heroine meets up with Toadswallow and Bubblegum. She's still a bit skeptical of her new mentor, but leaves him behind to make a play for Jasmine's graces. Unfortunately, the sour apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and Jasmine is just as negative as Lucy about Biscuit's whole thing. So never one to let a narc get her down. Biscuit accompanies the other goblins to America's home base and starts handing out free drugs to all the baddies.
In 18.6, Verona is having an extremely tough time at school, but gets the lowdown from Macaulay during her break and recuperates a little with her gaggle of girls in her domain. After school is mercifully over, Verona and Lucy strategize with Liberty about how to deal with the other Teds. She goes home to navigate her dad for a moment before finally having an extremely cathartic conversation with her mom.
Following that, in 18.7, the Ellingsons have Liberty and Goblins for dinner. The conversation touches on family and parenthood, culminating in a worried Jasmine helping Lucy become literally bulletproof. The Ted sisters can't resolve their differences on the other hand, so fighting breaks out against America and the two new best goblin, the Legar, who's lavishly slays. Anthem shows up to spoil Lucy's strength and break Liberty's heart. As Toad Swallow comforts Liberty, a pissed Lucy chases after Anthem to try and beat back some sense into him.
So following on straight from there, we go into 18.c, which introduces us to one of the trio's highest tier foes, the Sorcerer of Combat, Anthem Ted. In the midst of a 13-year rampage from fleeing his wife's tragic death, he's confronted by this fox-masked girl who takes issue with his parenting style. He shows off what a practitioner of his caliber can do as he just kind of wins duel after duel, but Kent has a lot of people, so he's eventually stalled long enough for Liberty and America's Stan army to show up. In the end, he's finally forced to stop running and participate in the Kenneth Found Civility course, where he finds some peace.
Yeah. In 18.8, Avery and her family head home, stopping along the way to play phone tag with a mysterious phone lord. The phone lord tries to make Avery agree to some dodgy shit, but she says, no way, and hangs up on it. Avery finally has a nice time with her girlfriend before being interrupted by Anne, like a total dweeb.
Don't worry, Anne's not done yet. 18.9, this is one of the chapters we didn't cover on this show. So this is the one where Avery sort of joins the cool kids, Millie and Basil, at the back of the bus. The trio trade tips on how to be less of a piece of shit and even get joined by our new friend Stanley, the child kidnapper, who still manages to judge Millie. Millie does start to make the earliest beginnings of a case for her redemption, and Avery throws her a bone without technically throwing her a bone, so she won't get in too much trouble from the phone lord. And with that handled, Avery goes and teams up with her new BFF, Thea, as they investigate Frankie and Frankie's fine monster, who turns out to be the goatiest goat that ever goated.
Then in 18.10, we have another multi-perspective chapter, where as the invasion of Kenneth winds down, Verona checks in with her gaggle of girls, now including Luna Hare, and gets ready for the next council meeting, which she has to face entirely on her own. It turns out to be a very productive meeting, however, as Verona has something of a eureka moment. Avery travels through the Goat of Goats and unravels its mysteries with Thea, before informing the rest of Thunder Bay and calling in reinforcements. Then, finally, Lucy gets a mysterious phone call from one Abraham Musser.
In the first interlude of this arc, we spend some time with Liz as she attempts to secure a space in her home. In Kenneth, this mostly means being huffy at missing the trio, allying with inferior technomancer Freeman, also known as Freak, to vex them, and bickering with her partners in crime. We eavesdrop on Musser offering a truce to Lucy, which gives Charles renewed hopes for his future.
And then, 18.Z treats us to a tasty sampling platter of the wider Ontario situation as it eases us into a time skip. Bree, Zed, and 10 adorable manifestations of the Kenneteers' swag face down one of Charles's monster traps in The Placement Test. Ann Wint gives us just a glimpse of the wonder that is Otherverse Halloween and still manages to make it stuffy and conservative. Forsworn Seth Belanger is redeemed as an early Christmas present from Charles to himself.
And as well, that was obviously all Arc 18, but as mentioned in the main episode, we are recording this after 19.1 and 2 have come out, so we'll probably touch on stuff that's happened in those a bit. But yeah, that's Arc 18.
Yeah. So what were our favourite parts of Arc 18, everybody?
Oh boy, lots of great stuff. I guess the Anthem and Lucy confrontation, probably my favorite.
Yeah, it has to be the centerpiece of this arc, doesn't it?
It was pretty wonderful, yeah.
It definitely was. Like, I think this was like a bit of a cool down arc. It feels reductive to call like arcs like this or Arc 14 or Arc 8 the cool down ones after big ones, because they do their own stuff too. But like, you know, Arc, it's definitely like a step down from intensity after Arc 17, and a bit of a like an arc focused on figuring out what to do next, and fitting Anthem and stuff into that was really fun.
Yeah, and we also check in. It's also a big moment for Lucy, because we see her earlier in the arc. We see her reflecting on how she's been treated throughout her life, and how fighting against those things hasn't really worked for her in the past. And now but now she takes those lessons with her in this fight, and it does work out.
Yeah.
And I think, like, that was a sensible sort of thing to follow on from Arc 17 because, like, Arc 17 wasn't really a win for Kenneth. Like, Muscle left, but it wasn't really anything they did, and like, it just meant Charles won. So it was sort of that thing. Like, you can see the link for Lucy where like they did all this fighting, and then it kind of forestalled them, but they didn't win. And that would have been frustrating. And so she kind of gets to finally get her win on Anthem in this arc.
Yeah, especially since one of the things that felt like they didn't actually win was Anthem, like managing to subvert in a way Kenneth found, which was their big move, and it looked like he was actually going to destroy it anyway until Charles intervened. So in the end, having like the winning condition of this arc being like Anthem having actually to go back to Kenneth Found and do his community work in a way in the place he almost destroyed, where he brought war and violence in this like sanctuary, and this was actually like a very needed win in a way. Yes, like karma after all, in some ways actually does help the Kennethians.
Yeah, and at the same time, we also really see what Lucy got out of Awakening. Why Miss picked her, because we saw Jasmine talk about how this wasn't the life she wanted for Lucy, and for all that Jasmine is an excellent parent, she isn't like omnipotent, and she wasn't able to keep the outside world from harming Lucy, from those forces of racism that she has been struggling against all her life, have actually really messed her up. And Awakening has empowered her to fight them more directly, and it does kind of pay off here.
Yeah, it's like in the eternal war of parenting, like between protecting your child and preparing them, it does seem like Jasmine was swinging a bit too far in protecting for Lucy, and luckily Miss was available to sort of fill that gap. Which I don't know if we've got this time skip now. Are we gonna see Jasmine and Miss have a conversation?
That's actually a good question.
Maybe they've already had it. We don't get to see
they
it.
probably had it, but
yeah, I don't think we get to see the big one, but I do think we get to see them talk to each other more casually.
The ongoing relationship will be interesting.
Yeah, also because I don't think it's just a question of like, I don't know, Jasmine having like one big rant on this and everything solved. It will be like, I assume it will be like an ongoing, it will be like a tense relationship between the two of them, I assume, as things go on.
Yeah. It's just, it's a little disappointing because some of the best parts of this book are Lucy just yelling at people, and, Jasmine was going to have her opportunity to show us where that came from.
Well, we saw some of that with Charles, actually, with Jasmine.
That's true.
Shut up.
That's true.
Which was very cathartic in some ways.
Oh, yeah, it was very good. But speaking of Anthem, I want to talk about him for a bit, because his interlude was fantastic.
Yeah, it was a highlight, wasn't it?
Because the way he ran from his own trauma and the way he framed that inside his own mind, basically by splitting his emotions up into like 6 different kinds of this is how I'm going to kick your ass, instead of actually dealing with anything. It was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And even besides what it says about Anthem as a character, the structure of that interlude was just amazing. Like the repeated motif of the 30 minutes, I think, or 30 days, and that sort of thing, was just fantastic. Really good stuff.
Yeah. No, it was actually very great to see how, like, essentially, literally, Anthem is literally disassociating from himself. Like, he creates emotional versions of himself just to keep fighting, because that's just what he does at this point. He has been pushed back. Like, there's a point where, he realizes Lucy has clearly some baggage with, like, fathers abandoning daughters. And so he's like, it's a bit disappointing. This is personal for you, and you can see it, because for him, like, someone who respects more someone who fights just for, like, the pleasure of fighting, instead of, like, because they have, like, some emotional core in it or something like that.
Yeah. Fighting is about running from your emotions, not running into them, you idiot. Yeah, especially because, like, for me, I think one of the big things that sort of was the thematic through line for this arc was looking at the ways like our environment can work to shape us.
Yeah.
And so like Anthem's interlude was really a story in what happens when somebody loses the big part of their environment that's shaping them. Like it's pretty clear Victoria was carrying a lot in terms of like keeping him together, and without her he went on a 13-year rampage. And it's taking somewhere like Kenneth Found to kind of put that back together.
Yeah, I think like when I finally really started, like not literally, maybe not literally shouting at the screen, "You idiot," but almost, was when he's like looking at like Scott Martin, who he knows is a spider shaman. He's seeing do the spider shaman thing, and he's like, like Scott is like creating spider web or whatever, and his first thought is like, oh, he's creating like woman's sews, and he's like, oh, it's been so long since I've been like with a woman who wears sews, and I can't you realize you haven't moved on from this thing for like 17, 20 years or whatever year ago.
Yeah, and then when he reads that question on the questionnaire and it found, and he just immediately zones out, just goes completely blank.
Yeah.
I think I asked this last week in the Lost episode. But since we've only had a brief glimpse of Anthem since, I think it's still worth asking. How are we feeling about what Anthem will look like coming out of Kenneth Found?
That's a huge question.
I think he's going to be reformed. I think I think we need to, maybe not fully reformed, but like, I think we need to see how can Kenneth spread as a place that is going to genuinely do good. If it's this like, pilot program for a new way of things being. So they need some more people to push that. And I think a good way to do that would be if this, this rehabilitation program actually ends up working to an extent.
Yeah. Especially since like when in our claims of Anthem in the new next in 19.1, we also have another part of the let's see the question about environment and the people around us shaping us, because he actually says that like one of the only people who could count for support was Master, which explains a lot about Anthem also, aside from what we saw in the interlude. And so obviously we have to see how much like spending time in Kenneth Found with his daughters, and most importantly, but also with the culture of Kenneth Found can be a counterbalance to that influence too. So
we already see him like being pretty comfortable in a teacher role with Macaulay, and I think that's a vision of a potential future for him. Like it a lot of it will depend on what will happen when his time here is up and he starts interacting with Master again.
Well,
because if we're talking,
there won't be any Master to interact with when he's not.
But when we're talking
potential
about
to backslide will be there.
Exactly.
For sure.
When we're talking about how the environment shapes us, then bringing him back into his old environment will be the true test of character.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting because, like in the eavesdropping part of the conversation, when they're eavesdropping on Master's and Lucy conversation, Lucy is obviously very aware of this, because when Master is offering the truth in exchange for Anthem, and she's like, "No, I think like spending time with his daughters and away from you, it's actually good for him. So I'm not bending on this even for a truce."
Yeah.
Oh, I love that moment where Anthem Master tries to give Lucy a compliment. She just won't. He gets all huffy about it.
He gets so prissy. It's incredible.
Yeah, but speaking of how the whole Kenneth project works, I think Biscuit gives us a very good insight into what's possible for it, because we've seen a lot of Goblin culture and how it works, and how Kenneth is trying something different, but we haven't really seen a clash between the two up until Biscuit's interlude, because in Biscuit's interlude we see Biscuit being drawn into that mob mentality of supporting America and liberty. One of them is better than the other, but still. And then we see her being tempted and drawn into that. But then in one of the coolest moments of that chapter, we see her think of, Ram Jam and Toad Swallow and all the others, and realizing that no, she wants that more than she wants the hype of being one of America's groupies, basically. And that is a lot of what Kenneth is. and especially what the Kenneth Goblin community is, even to someone like Blunt Munch, who seems to be coming around.
Hopefully. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
Blunt Match is a bit of the anthem of the goblins in a way.
Yeah, he definitely is.
No, it was interesting seeing him again because I'd kind of thought he might be just like disappearing from the story, but there's a hint there that we might get to see him. But you're right. Like I think uh, I think in last week's episode I talked a bit about like the whole goblin nature versus nurture stuff, and I think you're right. Like showing a goblin like Biscuit is such a great way to talk about like how Kenna is an environment that's shaping people. Because Biscuit, her shtick is also just like really hard to make something that you can live with. As much as I love Biscuit and think she's great material, like it's really she's hard mode for someone like Toad Swallow who's trying to take these goblins and turn them into like good things because she essentially relies on drugging people. Um, and the fact that he's like kind of working with her to make her do that in a good way or as good as you can get, like, is just such a great case for what Kenneth is. And you're right, that moment where she sort of chooses it because she realizes that there's actually a community there is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, Kenneth also allows Biscuit to work towards her real motivation. Like when she talks about that final grand finale to her Barney shtick, and it turns out to actually be kind of good. Like the rest of the shtick is indeed very morally dubious, but yeah, that capstone that she presented there was actually kind of cool, and the fact that Toad Swallow got her to admit that, and to admit that the whole good ending was something that she does more for herself than to impress other goblins, and then encourages her to pursue that good goal instead of all the shady shit that comes in front of it,
Yeah.
is actually really impressive, because she's also open to that. Because like if she was a different kind of goblin, then she just wouldn't accept that Toad Swallow was helping her with that, but not with everything else she's doing. But Biscuit seems open to what Toad Swallow's doing in that sense, and that's really cool.
Best goblin.
Ramjam still takes that spot.
Go Ramjam. Yeah, extending a bit about the talk about nature and nurture and the community around you shaping you, which is like prominent about also more in a more specific way, also especially how parenting can shape you and whether parenting should shape you. Like there's a lot of talk about how much kids are or should be an extension of their parents. We see it also with the Biscuit, like when she's talking with Miles, and Miles is talking about our parents, and by proxy also Master, of course, because they're Master stooges or shaping us, and that's why Easton is at his coolest, because Miles is friend with Easton, is at his coolest when he's not being what he thinks his parents want him to be. But of course, it's hard also at his age to try and escape that, and of course with Liberty in America, and America becoming a thug for her father as Toad Swallow. So aptly put, and now Lucy is desperately trying to make Anthem realize that his daughters aren't him. They want different things in life. They have different goals, different passions, which of course they also understood via surrounding themselves with Goblin and having a new community of their own, which in the end also rescues them in a way from Anthem and his like parental expectations. But also we see it with like, especially with like Anne's daughter, who isn't even named, and even in Anne's interlude, she's always her daughter, and Avery calls her little tiny Anne. So like she's literally looks like she might be just like literally just Anne writ small and continuing. But hopefully maybe there's hope for her, just as there's hope for Miles and maybe even Easton. And I'm also thinking actually the very first chapter, when Master, the only time he actually mentions Reed, which is actually after the trio actually accuses him of like sacrificing his son. And the only time he actually mentions Reed in that one, when he assures them that Reed was not master enough to control his familiars, but that's not his case, and his familiars won't betray him. So literally, like Reed, he wasn't enough of a master, so like he doesn't count anymore. Like don't even spare a thought about him mostly.
What a compliment.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Listen, the fact that Reed was better than Musser at school, because Reed never had to, eat someone's brains through their shit, is makes him look better in retrospect. Even though
Yeah.
uh,
Actually, it's
we
very
knew,
funny.
yeah,
Sorry, go
even
on.
though he was shit, but at least now we get like a spiritual successor to Reed in Easton,
In
Yeah,
Easton,
yeah.
yes.
and
No,
I
but
love Easton. I love him so much. He's such an asshole. Oh, I love the little shit.
He's spectacular, isn't he? He's such a
Well,
fun character to hate.
He's such
Yeah.
a like 15-year-old asshole too. Like
Yes, exactly.
I knew that exact person at high school, and I think that's why he works, because you're just like, oh fuck, that person is out there right now. There are 100,000 Easterns somewhere on the
Yeah.
planet.
Yeah, that's what I like. It's just saying shit in a like very teenager way. Like you can take out like the magic gauntlet and everything, and you can still make sure Easton.
Yeah, and it makes the fact that he literally gets his ass kicked out of the house make so much more satisfying, because people like that who didn't get that kind of comeuppance, and now you get to see it in
Mhm.
Easton. It's fantastic, and at the same
Yeah.
time, you also know exactly why he is the way he is. We were talking about environments and parents,
Mhm.
because we saw him interact with his parents a little bit in Arc 17. And even in those few interactions, you know exactly that they're very responsible
Oh yeah. Oh,
for shaping him into the kid he is. So I hope
yeah.
that having his view of reality challenged as much as Verona and Shay before her did, I hope that does knock some things loose inside of him.
Yeah, Miles might also need to carry that a bit
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
because somebody who's in his life already, I think, trading tips with Biscuit on how to reform him might be important.
But until then, he can give Verona like top tier combat practitioners.
As an insult, yes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
we haven't seen the delivery on that yet, have we? Oh, I
Not
can't wait
yet,
for that.
no.
Oh, it's gonna be great. No, I was saying I really liked Miles' interaction with Biscuit, aside from like the talk
Yeah.
about parenthood and it's also because you can see actually Miles starting to realize like coming like we see actually Kenneth found actually doing its job, because it's actually making him realize that he can have like a serious talk with a goblin like about deep stuff and actually be meaningful, like and even like actually checks himself, because when like Biscuit essentially compares like what he's going through with, oh yeah, I know it because I'm a goblin or however it was, and he's like, wait, I want to immediately criticize that, but I realize I would actually hurt my argument, and that's actually, you can actually see the gears starting to run in his head about, oh, maybe things can be different. At least I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of pushing Easton down the stairs, I guess Verona and her domain, and I think we've already stolen this term from you in our other episode, Mega. Her gaggle of girls.
Yeah.
That's also such a great thing that's come about, this whole idea of like how our environment shapes us, because obviously
Mhm.
Verona has escaped her shitty one. She's kind of making her own, and it's already becoming this place where people who are a bit lost, a bit different, a bit struggling are sort of gathering and kind of helping each other, and it's turning into this place where a bunch of weird girls are coming and making each other better, and you'll love to see it.
Yeah, and it's even already paying off for Verona, because like in 18.5, she actually communicates that she's feeling lonely and would like to sleep over. And that's a huge step for her, because she used to not even so much bottle up her own emotions as just not realize that she was having them. And the fact that
Until it
she's
was too late.
yeah, and the fact that she's now putting in the effort into, realizing what she's feeling and acting on it, that's huge. That's a massive step for her, and it's partly because of the group she's gathered around herself now. Because let's face it, all the girls she has around herself with Melissa and Mal and Macaulay, and even Luna Hare to some extent, they're all kind of shit at being people. But because of that, they're helping each other out in in pretty interesting ways. Because I compared it to that nightmare vision. she had
Mhm.
of her and Melissa being drug addicts and having lost any hope for the future. And I don't think you need to stretch that image very much to see Mal and Macaulay next
Yeah.
to them also in that vision, that they would also be on that downward spiral or stuck in a rut and not even be trying to accomplish anything anymore. But now when you put them all together, the furthest thing from that, like, there is absolutely no threat at all at this point that Verona is going to end up in that situation, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like what that comes down to, like as I said, is almost this embracing of like diversity away from like the Canon above standard. Because like why I think Verona was driving herself into the ground was because she was using the measuring stick of people like Lucy and people who function
Yeah.
in Canon above as kind of like that's what she was meant to be doing. And like part of why this gaggle is working is because it's allowing her to see like the way that you should just be carving your own path. Is like surrounding yourself with a bunch of people who clearly need to carve their own weird ass paths
Yeah.
makes it easier for her to sit there and be like, oh, it's perfectly fine and acceptable for me to just be doing some weird shit.
Yeah.
And she always
Yeah.
kind of wanted to do that, but it's like I think it's just bridged that gap and made it easier for her to accept that part of herself in a more substantial way now that she's sort of doing this with a bunch of other weirdos.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
also changes the tone of their friendship. Like Verona's friendship with Lucy is very different. Lucy is very I don't want to say she's very intense about Verona's emotions, kind of, in that
Yeah.
she wants to talk things out. She wants to get to the bottom of things and help solve things and help Verona solve things in her own life.
She's a problem solver, right?
Yeah, exactly. But
Well, and
sometimes that's
also, 6 months ago, if Lucy wasn't doing that, it didn't happen.
yeah, exactly. But sometimes that's a bit much for Verona, and like all of her friendship with her gaggle is
Love that word.
is like way lower in intensity, and in some cases more antagonistic in ways that I think make Verona feel a lot more comfortable, because she doesn't have they don't have to work on solutions when they're hanging out together. They can sometimes just commiserate about how shit their lives are, and
Yeah.
that's fine. And I think that's really helping her relax.
Yeah, it's like that old like trope you hear about, when someone comes to you with their problems and sometimes they don't want a solution, they just want to vent. And I don't think Lucy is so good at being that person who you just vent to. She's one of those people who needs to help you solve the problem, whereas what Verona needed was someone she could just scream into the void at.
Yeah, and like obviously she's still a very close friend to Lucy, and their friendship is still very important to both of them. But it's a different kind of friendship, and I think Verona's really realizing and really and really making work of the fact that she needs both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we see actually, it's an undercurrent actually, but we see it really sad even in this arc about Verona and also Lucy. But since we're talking about Verona, worrying about the fate of her friendship with Lucy, and it's like actually just like, and I think when Sylvia talks with her, I think that's also brought up that it's not really something that's like really at risk, but it's more like a friendship that is changing as they're growing up and making more friends, the both of them. Instead, like Verona making friends with Mal and Macaulay and Melissa too, and I guess Luna here is also changing the relationship, how she approaches also a relationship with Lucy. But like that's not a bad thing. It's fine. It's something normal. Like friendship changes as some people grow up, especially friendships that were like since they were in like kindergarten, like Lucy and Verona. And we see like Sylvia reassuring her that's not something that's going to go away, especially once they start talking about like maybe having Verona do some alternative ways of pursuing education in some alternative ways instead of school. And she's worried this means she might not spend as much time with Lucy, and I think it's going to be fine, really, because especially since they really have like one of the most intensive extracurricular activity ever, where they're always together anyway. So that's probably not going to be a problem.
Oh, it was one of those things where she's like, "Oh, if I'm not going to school with Lucy, then what if I'm not spending enough time with her?" And it's like, "I'm sorry, you were going to school again? You were spending time with Lucy at school." Like,
Exactly.
unfounded fear of all time.
Yeah.
And also talking about the conversation with Sylvia, since you talked about like Verona needing validation to like just be weird and it being okay, we basically have Sylvia telling her that essentially, and we see it's actually like also a bit of a counteract to what we were talking before about parents who want their children to be them essentially, whereas Sylvia essentially is saying just be yourself and that's okay, that's fine, that's what you should do, just be yourself, don't be afraid essentially. Which was nice seeing her so supportive, especially since, like, let's be honest, Sylvia was also part of the somewhat absentee parents of this story for like a good chunk of the story until now.
Sylvia's sin was never enforcing her will on her daughter.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah,
exactly.
she really came in and impressed as a parent this chapter.
Yeah.
In that conversation she had with Verona, because wow, she really nailed that, absolutely. And I think she managed to tell Verona exactly what she needed to hear at that point.
At the right time.
Yeah.
It's it feels like Sylvia finally got the message that she's needed, and now that she's sort of trying, I mean, it's exactly what was needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking when during the arc where Verona is away with her mom and dealing with her problems, and like at one point Sylvia talks about how like her relationship with her mother was always very like a bit cold when she was a kid, but once she grew up, it was more like we became closer. It was more like a friendship peer relationship between the two, and I'm starting to think maybe Sylvia is realizing that she can already start having that kind of relationship with Verona even now, even if she's like still a kid, and maybe that's something that maybe even scared Sylvia a bit because she wasn't sure how to interact with her like with her daughter as a kid. But she was realizing that if Verona can be who she wants to be, it's fine. She can like just talk with her and like without the baggage, without that kind of baggage anyway.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to learn Sylvia is just really bad with kids, and part of the turnaround has been she stopped treating Verona as a kid, or thinking of Verona as a kid.
Yeah, so kind of seeing the evolution of the trio and their relationships is something that we've talked about a fair amount for this arc. What else are we looking forward to? I mean, this arc is kind of a transitional arc, so seeing the relationship between Verona and Lucy, or just the relationship between the Kentiers in general, evolve is something that we've been kind of keeping tabs on and eager to kind of see continue into Arc 19. What else are we excited that Arc 18 has set up?
Well, I guess also the new status quo with the parents in the know, of course, and how it develops.
For sure.
Yeah, especially since we're already starting to see like the various differences between the parents. Like we have Connor, who's basically just geeking out about everything that's practice, and I guess now we know where Avery gets some of her darkishness, I guess. And whereas Kelsey is like more fraught, she's like really, she's more uncomfortable with all of this. She's less on her game about all this, which is also a bit like something Avery is a bit worried about, which is also why she invited the Garricks to like let her see a relatively normal practitioner family and let her know she can just continue to be her mom as she's always been. And now, and I guess it's also a bit of like an inversion how when Avery came out, like we saw Kelsey essentially like kept being her mom as normal, whereas Connor started to like be, was a bit weird about it essentially. Now we're seeing a bit of like an inversion here.
Yeah, I think we talked about that a bit in one of our episodes, but the vibe I very much got was that like Kelsey was just kind of aware and evolved enough to realize that Avery being gay didn't really change her life trajectory as much as it might have like 50 years ago or whatever. Like, obviously there are obstacles in your life that can come of this, but like, technically there's nothing stopping her from still just getting a job, going to university, like doing whatever she wants to do. There's plenty of online reading materials about how to deal with your child being gay or whatever. There's no, or maybe there should be reading materials to how to deal with your child being a wizard. And so like Connor's kind of already had to go through the like, oh shit, I don't know what this is, and so now he's just keen. Whereas like this is actually Kelsey's first time having to grapple with the fact that the plan is not what she thought it was.
Yeah. And on the other hand, Avery being a wizard is basically just Connor's dream come true.
Yeah.
Like, Avery is currently living Connor's dream life. Like his childhood, it's his childhood at its finest. While I think Kelsey was maybe more grounded in a non-magical reality. So also the fact that magic is like a thing now is a bit of a shock to her system. On top of that,
I just love how. I just love how Connor was sort of like, my daughter is the protagonist. Fuck yeah,
that's fucking awesome. Yeah, it's not even like Avery is just a regular child wizard in this world. She's one of the more powerful ones, and she's getting in way more danger than most of them do. So, we can understand why Kelsey is a little bit nervous about all that.
Yeah, but also at the same time, I feel like Kelsey is a bit nervous about it in a different way than say Jasmine is, whereas Jasmine is was very front and center, the fact that this is dangerous, and it's dangerous for Lucy and Verona, obviously, and Avery, and now children shouldn't be doing this. And we also see her so she's very super into checking all the notes, whereas we see Connor and Kelsey are a bit more whenever Avery is mentions a name, you're oh yeah, we read about it, but maybe we don't really remember. Whereas Jasmine is all very on the book, she's all very even Liberty notices she seems very she's very speed up on everything essentially already, but she really wants to understand this world so she can understand the dangers of it in a way, whereas Kelsey is obviously still worried about the dangers, but she's also worried about the very shift in reality in a way, I guess I want to put it. It's something new essentially, and that's also what's scaring her, aside from the fact that it's something new and the dangers.
Yeah, you can kind of see, the daughters and the parents a bit there, because Jasmine's response was to start, verbally attacking this magical world until it let her know what was going on. Whereas Kelsey has withdrawn a bit and started to panic, and Avery has often been making sure Kelsey's okay rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Speaking of though, Avery has also made massive steps, especially in her conversations with Anne. She's just beyond taking any shit at this point, isn't she?
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
And we're really starting to see those glamour check marks pay off. Remember when we were worried about those?
Yeah. I remember spending arcs thinking that they were not going to be a good thing, and then they just kind of, I don't even think Avery's thought about them for quite a while. I think they got one mention maybe sometime in Arc 18, but she's just kind of internalized them in the healthy way that they were seemingly intended.
Yeah, she's just gotten the confidence boost from them, and now she's very secure in who she is, and she's just not willing to put up with anyone trying to tell her what to do.
Some self-appointed person thinks that she's her intern. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Yeah, run the girl.
So I think one of the other things I wanted to talk about too, while we're talking about, an arc that was saying a lot about environments and how that shapes us. Obviously, this was also our arc where we're really exploring this dynamic of our 3 new kenneths. Obviously, that was most prevalent in 18.A, where we, saw the birth of someone in each, or conception. And I guess something that really sort of fascinated me about this is because this is Pale, there's about 100 different ways you can look at the 3 kenneths and see what they're saying about parts of the story. But one of the really interesting ones I thought was you can almost view each of the kenneths now as one of our major sides in this battle, sort of advocating for what they think things should be. So obviously, Kenneth below, Charles comes out in this arc and says, I made it to be this. Kenneth found pretty straightforward, it's Mrs. Utopia. And then, Master and stuff are essentially fighting for the status quo. They're fighting for Kenneth above to be how things operate, the human supremacy sort of deal. And I just think it's kind of really telling that the majority of Kenneth is actually working on the unification of these 3 ideals. There's almost this sense of, as much as we want to shit on Mossa and stuff. Like there are things to like in Kenneth above, and don't tell Verona I said this, but there's a reason it was there, and there are things to like there. So there's stuff that's great about Kenneth found, but it's not going to be for everyone, and Kenneth below even has its own perks too.
Yeah.
And so like I think this is a really easy thing to miss that the story I think is doing, which is sort of setting up the three Kennets kind of represent the three sides in our conflict. And really what the Kenneteers are almost already saying is it's a union of these ideas that is the way forward, not like picking one. Like I don't even think Kenneth would say Kenneth found should be the main one now. They're
No.
advocating for all three.
Yeah, and I think I think the interesting part here is how much effort Lucy, but especially Verona, has put into shaping Kenneth below as part of this thesis. Because it's not none of these places are the best on their own.
Yeah,
Like they work for some people, but not for others. And what Charles wants with Kenneth below is just messed up, and the fact that he objects to people trying to make that place a little bit better just shows how full of shit Charles is. But we see it there that Verona put a lot of effort into establishing some degree of rule of law, basically. And we also see it in how everyone is working to establish paths between the three Kenneth, so that people from Kenneth Found can kind of freely move to either of the other two, if they want to. And we see that there are enough people who do want to. Like there are a lot of people in Kenneth below who want to give Kenneth Found a shot, or want to move to Kenneth above. And we also see people from Kenneth Found who are kind of enamored with the idea of Kenneth below, like the people that Biscuit sold their stuff to.
Yeah.
Well, kind of interested in, like, actually experiencing things is cool. I want to go to Kenneth below and do some weird shit. And I think what you're saying. I think what you're saying is true, because Kenneth is very interested in enabling those kinds of movement and that kind of integration.
Yeah, I mean the bad guys in this story, like Mossa is bad because he's enforcing the worst, most extreme kind of Kenneth above. Charles is bad because he's enforcing the worst, most extreme kind of Kenneth below. And there's probably a version of this where, I mean, well, I guess we saw it with Moss's people. Miss can be the baddie when you're just trying to get shit done, and she drowns you in hippie bureaucracy.
Hippie bureaucracy.
And like it's this sort of vibe. Like this is something Pale's had in it since the start. Like I think something we used to talk about right back in Arc 1 would be, Pale already felt like it was saying, there's not one size fits all solutions for everyone, and the trio of Kennets is such an interesting way to explore this, because we're sort of saying, yeah, well, Kenneth below works for some people, Kenneth Found works for others. It doesn't need to be one or the other. There's a way to get these sorts of things and have them coexist, and it's just going to be fascinating to see what that, like, where Kenneth might take that idea. Like, because I don't think the answer that they're really going to be pitching is, okay, we'll take every city in Canada or the world and we'll give it an undercity and we'll give it some weird lost add-on. Like, that's not a scalable solution, but as like a kind of trio of extreme cases, it can pitch this sort of, we need this balance because there's things to like from all of these three extremes.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure that Kenneth at the moment is interested in like exporting its vision to the rest of the world so far. I think at this point it's mostly interested in keeping itself afloat and
not dying.
Yeah, exactly. And even just making itself work. And like, it might serve, as Miss thought way back when, as a blueprint for as a precedent for later changes. But I don't think Kenneth at the moment is interested in establishing like a wider political movement.
No, I guess this is just me. I when I see things like this that I like, I'm like, okay, how do we spread this?
Well, I guess Avery is a bit of like Kenneth's ambassador, but at least for now, mostly like we're in a war, we need help, I guess. And so maybe if you want to try the cool city over here, give it a
Yeah,
try,
but
I guess. But yeah, it's still not like obviously like a movement to expand, I guess. Yeah.
yeah, I think the political movement that Kenneth does represent is treating others as people.
Yeah.
We see this in what Avery is doing in Thunder Bay. We see it in Biscuit's conversation with Miles. We see it a little bit in Anthem Civility Course. It's
Of course.
expanding the definition of what a person is.
Yeah,
to
it's like an ideological, yes, on the ideological
to a culture that is very restricted in who it allows to count as people.
I'd also argue that that ties into the conversation the Page had with Avery. I know this is like a bit of a backdated reference, but like I remember Avery sort of felt like she lost him when she had that moment where she said, I think humans might need to be or might deserve to be a bit self-centered because it does seem like all others sort of come from us, blah, blah, blah. And I think that she's close, but it's like I think the answer the Page was looking for is the understanding that like they are us, you know, they come from us. It's all the same shit. Like I think to someone like the Page out in the outer regions, the answer is just kind of it's all like it's all the same shit. Stop tearing that you're all human of human. It doesn't matter. It's all human shit.
Yeah, and I guess that's also a bit. The point of the structure of like 18.A when we have like the birth of the foundling, the birth of the undercity person, the birth of the normal human, like quote unquote, and that like in the end, yes, it's in the end there's not much that the differences are less than one might think. The similarities more.
Yeah, I wrote that essay about the binary between other and human.
Yeah.
At the end of the last arc, and I have to say 18.A was very validating in that respect.
Yeah, 100%. Because I just again, I think we talked about. I can't remember if we talked about this last week in our Lost episode or whatever, but it was just like conceptually the idea for Wildbow to sort of be like you add the conception of a human as the third thing, just to like really make it clear. It's like we don't have any high ground to sit on in terms of there's no the way humans breed isn't more natural than the pars or whatever, because when you really think about how conception works, that's some weird fucking sci-fi shit. So does it really make more sense to be birthed by a sperm penetrating an egg than it does to be whipped out of a path as like a weird speck of balance and get merged with other shit by a crazy demiurge?
Yeah, I mean they're equally ridiculous, right? That's the whole point.
Exactly.
And also, I'm also thinking, going back to the idea that Kenneth's political movement, in a way, it's like trying to expand the idea, the idea of personhood, I guess, to others, to the body. So we also see it a bit in like the Ann section of the interlude, where there's Halloween, when like it's allowed for others to mingle more in like innocent society in a bit, and Avery very understandably asks, why can't you do it every day then? And like Anne is like, oh, you silly child, you'll understand when you're older.
Yeah, no, they get to be people for the night.
Yeah.
Okay. Can't we just do that all the time? What are you, crazy?
Don't be ridiculous. The plebs get one taste of the real life, and then they have to go back to their slums.
Yeah.
Just to give them that little taste to keep them envious, but
this weird sort of anti-purge.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in one of your libraries you compared it to like Carnival, and the idea like for one day the world is upside down, and it's very much that we give them one day to be free, so they're content.
Yeah. So they get a taste, and they know what they're looking up to.
If these others just get there and they pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah, exactly. Because it can be done, Just look at Shay. She's another, but she gets to be human because she works at it. Get yourself up by those bootstraps, you weirdos.
Speaking of someone who's very fond of pulling people by their bootstraps, there's also Charles, actually.
Oh God, yeah.
Yes, I think I used that phrase about 6 times when we talked about Charles's motivation last week, actually, because that was like it's very much the vibe he set up in Kenneth Below. Is somehow he was forsworn and got absolutely shat on by the universe, and his takeaway was the only bad thing that happened here was that I wasn't given the opportunity to rise. Like, I should create a world where everyone's miserable, but they technically all have the capability to, pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not the lesson from what happened to you, bud. Like,
going back to the idea that like Kenneth is very, the trio Kenneth side is very intent on like trying to unite the three sides of Kenneth to make the best version of Kenneth out of the three of them. And we see instead how the Charles faction is instead very opposed to this. We see it when he's explaining his master plan, which is definitely not evil, not to say that, Verona. His master plan when he's like almost outraged that they're like sending people from Kenneth Below to Kenneth Found to get help, because that's not the point. That's not why he created the Undercity. That's not its breeding ground for misery and soldier to grow out from that misery, which also kind of misses the point that the only reason Charles could now do all of this is because he got help for like 10 years. If he had been left alone, wallowing in misery, it'd be like all the other Forsworn out there is worried about, essentially.
Yeah, he was just outraged that they were offering universal healthcare, basically.
Yes,
yeah. But it's the veneration of suffering that really gets to me, and it gets me when it happens in real life also, because suffering breeds character. No, suffering just hurts. It doesn't do anything.
Which
it just fucks people up. It's not good.
Which actually makes me interesting about the ending with with Seth and his unforswearing, or however you want to call it, because like there's one view where maybe Seth like he again, quote unquote, learned his lesson via being forsworn, and now he might be a better person, which I somewhat doubt. And there's like the other view where just like suffering is not a lesson. Suffering is just suffering. It can even make you worse because you're suffering and like you don't have like the time, even the energy to like try to do stuff to get better. And so now I guess we'll see what Seth got out of this. And I suppose I suspect it might not be much different from what Charles got out of this, especially if he's hanging around with Charles.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be interesting because I'd argue Seth started in a worse place than Charles.
Yes.
I think like Charles was actually a pretty good dude when he got forsworn.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes, like did Seth get a wake up call with his forswearing, or was it just misery piled upon misery, which just like drowned him instead of like buoying up?
Well, but then Charles was forsworn for a lot longer, and has clearly gestated in this. I think Ray coined the resentment sort of phrasing,
yes.
like the as we said, Charles has somehow come out of this thinking that the problem was that he was cut off from rising to the top, not that people are getting pushed down and molded by hardship. And I guess it'll be interesting to see. Seth was somebody who had it pretty cushy and has just been shut on for, I mean, he'd only be 6 months forsworn or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Like what it's going to be very interesting to see how he's come out the other end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But while we're talking about Charles's faction, we talked a lot about being shaped by your environment so far, and we haven't brought up Liz once. I think we need to rectify that, because wow, Liz got shaped by her environment. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I mean, that's why she was the of the two sort of end interludes, she got her own. Like, I think for the arc talking about being shaped by your environment, of course, Liz had to be 18.Y. Look at her.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that she's still so much in the mindset of the school she was born in, basically, of scheming and backstabbing and constantly worrying about being found out and being expelled or whatever. Despite the fact that she's moved to entirely different places with entirely different environments with entirely different dynamics, she's still stuck in exactly that, and she still wants to like control all of Kenneth. Like the fact that she stole Kenneth from Ken by killing him, and now that Kenneth is trying to, separate themselves from that even a little bit, even by denying her access to only 1/3 of it. She's like, "No, that's mine. I want it. You can't do that to me. Don't you know who I am?" And it's just like, no, stop that.
Yeah, but what's interesting about Liz and the environment which definitely shaped her is how she's also, like, as you said, because she's still stuck in like the private fancy school environment, even though she moved on. She physically moved on, but clearly hasn't moved on.
Yeah.
Because she's still like, she's shaped by her environment on an almost like literal level, very literal level. But at the same time, she's the one who chooses which environment shapes her, because we see it. We actually see it when, like, she's sitting with Edith, and she's like, "Oh no, I drew on the more empathetic people around here, so I could be nice to you." And but normally she doesn't do that. She chooses the scheming people, the mean people, and because it's interesting because she uses that as her excuse. She uses it in the interlude in the school section when she's thinking, "I'm doing this because I'm you," and she also does it like early on when they get their first meeting with the trio, and she's like, "I'm like this because I'm like your reflection in a way," no? But that's only true up to a point. She can choose what she wants to reflect. But she doesn't, because she's been shaped by her environment on a different level, I guess. Not on the very literal, she's a doppelganger who copy us, but she was born in that environment and she couldn't move on.
Yeah, well, I think because in exploring how our environment shapes us, like part of that is coming down to like how you engage with it doing so. So we saw, as we talked about before, Biscuit kind of consciously realized what Kenneth was doing for her. Well, and what we've seen with Liz is she's come out of this with this obsession with trying to shape, like, as somebody who was very overtly shaped by her environment, she's come out of it with this obsession with shaping it back, and just kind of in that way hasn't left the one that she came from, and it exists as this, animus of FOMO. And she's just constantly trying to like control the environment she's in this way, so that way, she's not being shaped by it, or so she thinks. And it's just, we see how poorly it's working for her.
Yeah, it's just not making her happy, is it? And she
No.
never stops to ask herself, "Hey, why am I not happy? Why am I this close to everything I think I want, but I still feel absolutely fucking miserable?" She doesn't ask herself that question because she thinks she knows why she's miserable, and it's because she doesn't control everything. And she gets really pissy about that. And we see that especially when she decides to attend the council meeting, and she's like, "Yeah, well, you lot keep saying that you defeated Muscle, but you didn't. We did, and you could get so much further if you just joined us." And like, to some degree, you might say she has a point, but that goes both ways. Charles's plan only worked because Kenneth was able to hold Muscle off for that long, that he could, sneak all his powerful lords in on the back end. Like, if Muscle had just chilled out in all those places, if his lords had been in place, Charles might have had a much more difficult job in unseating them. But because all the powerful ones were sieging Kenneth, Charles had a way easier time of doing that, and Liz just doesn't see that, and just says, "Yeah, hey, you should join us. It'll make things better for you somehow," even though we're absolutely not interested in making things better for you.
And I thought it was interesting seeing the effect it seemed like she almost had on the group of the culprits too, because I think in most of the other instances we've seen the three of them together, there has been this kind of sense of them being somewhat a bit of a team. And the first time we're really kind of seeing the cracks in that illusion is the one where we're seeing it where Liz has asked them together. And it's like, as Liz gathers them around her, like that's where we're starting to see that even the culprits aren't actually that close. And it's like, she's just really good at breaking the people around her apart.
Because they really don't get along, do they? Like,
No.
not at all. I was actually surprised by how much tension there was between them. Like, I figured they wouldn't. I figured Edith wouldn't be getting along with them anymore after what they did to her. After after they kept her they kept her hopes up about Matthew, only to even though Marissa and Charles both knew that they were setting her up to fail, just so she'd be on board for a little bit longer and stick with the plan. And honestly, this was the first time that I actually kind of sympathized with Edith again, because we saw the moment it became clear that that hope they'd been dangling in front of Edith was a false one.
Yeah.
She basically immediately gave in. So it's hard not to conclude that Mariska especially, but also Charles, deliberately kept her obsession with Matthew alive, while without their efforts, it would have died down.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The fact that we also finally see it shatter helps with that, finally feeling sad for Edith a bit, because now that it's finally shattered, there's potentially a room to her becoming a better person, and that's why you start to be like, oh, I can feel for you now because you're not actively digging deeper anymore.
Yeah, but she still can't leave because, they swore oaths to help each other, which means that
Yeah.
if she leaves, she's forsworn. Isn't that right, Charles? I mean, come on. That's just so hypocritical, my dude. Just why?
Charles, hypocritical?
It is what I would say was going to keep forswearing as a weapon in his arsenal if necessary. So
speaking of hypocrites and using the tools of your oppressors, it'll be interesting to see where Rook does end up with what seems like a slide towards working with the culprits almost more than Kenneth, or trying to be the one who acts as the middleman between them.
Yeah, I'm still very curious about Rook, specifically because of that. Like, we're still not entirely sure what side she's on. I think we have a clearer image of what side the Turtle Queen is on at this point than we do of Rook, and that's saying something.
It just feels like Rook's trajectory has been towards teaming up with Charles and pushing Kenneth further towards Charles's agenda, but also we've been down this road with Rook before. She's an Oni, like, we thought she was fucking evil for so long, and then it turned out she was Mrs. BFF. So, like, part of me is like, is this all some weird ass fucking plan to make Charles, to lure Charles into a trap or something, like, or have somebody who has Charles's ear or whatever. Like, I can't rule that possibility out with Rook.
Yeah.
Something. So I guess I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts too on like Massa and where. What do you think is next for Team Massa? And I guess I am asking this with knowledge that you've read up to assume 19.3.
We keep hearing that he's going to come back in 3 months. I don't know if I believe it. Like,
well, no, it was 3 days originally, and that was why he had the phone call with Lucy, which was a bit of a like, like I'm doing peace offerings
3
with them or
months
something.
is after 2 days.
Yeah, but like it's clearly not Kenneth's clearly not his biggest worry, right?
No, and actually we even see how, like, when he gives like the 3 months extension, we see basically Charles seeing it as like his almost like it's like the beginning of the end for Master almost. And it's like, which is interesting, especially since obviously this the opening chapter of the arc was like Master being able to like step down was something like almost not unexpected, but which goes almost against everything he is as Master, as the Master, and it's almost like, and obviously where that was how can I say, how that was like shaped, that was framed as if he had kept going on as his nature almost bids him to, he would have gone into utter catastrophe. But now it almost seems like stepping down for 2 days and now for 3 months, maybe we'll get 6 months, 1 year, we don't know, will also be something that is catastrophic for him anyway. So it's interesting, especially since we see at least this in her interlude, but it's a sentiment we've seen exposed more than once, talks about Master almost as is like, like one of the big inevitable forces, like the incarnation of authority. She starts thinking about in her interlude. So that is someone who's like always on his path and cannot be bent, cannot move, cannot stray from his path in a way. And we also know it's also because he's literally like his family is literally the Musser family lives within him. And so seeing him like actually backing down for increasing amounts of time, and even Charles and Marisica have like this mysterious smiles, like, oh, this is now our plan is coming to fruition or something, which is also interesting to think about in terms of what it means for Master to be someone who's described as almost unbendable, and now is somewhat abandonable, I guess.
Yeah. I'm reminded of Verona's contest with Bristow way back when. When Bristow sent his aware to Kenneth, Verona called him and said she'd make him regret sending them. And then when they were at the BHI, Bristow kept confronting her every day. She didn't make him regret it, because you can say, "Oh, I will eventually make you regret it," but that kind of thing loses its power every day you don't do it, and the other side calls you out on the fact that you're not doing it yet. And I'm feeling like that's something that's happening with Musser here.
Yeah.
Like he keeps postponing that, but every time he postpones it, like his claim that he will do it grows a lot weaker.
Yeah, I think it actually hurts himself in a way, in a sense, like almost like maybe not against saying, because actually that's also what like Charles Plessy say, it's not like against saying, but it's the same thing in the end. So I think it does actually hurt him. Obviously, like in his pursuing of his agenda, it's hurting him because obviously he needs to actually go on the counterattack at that point. But also like on the spiritual level, you could say it's actually something that's not best for him. He's not in a great position.
Yeah, and we see in Avery's conversation with Millie and Basil that Musser's faction has won back a few lordships, but they're still mostly losing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't think he's in a very good position right now. I don't think his entire faction is in a good position. But I think it's way too risky to call him even close to defeated yet. Like even Charles's faction doesn't think he's out of the running. So I'm very curious to see what he pulls out to turn things around into his favor again. Because I would be surprised if we just saw a slow decline moving forward. I think Muscle 2 is planning on something big to get the momentum back into his favor now.
I guess Musser is also not someone he's not someone who'll go down with a whimper instead of a bang. I guess he'll do something. He'll have his glorious last charge or whatever.
Because it would make such a bad movie if he just, dwindled.
Yeah, and as somebody who stands for the, largest status quo, I mean, the thing we've constantly heard is that his ticket is also that he can call in people from outside the region.
Yeah.
So like that feels like the obvious direction for where his big next play can come from, is he can call in, I don't even know what it looks like, but big wigs from elsewhere to sort of, I guess the equivalent and how the innocents might interpret it would be like peacekeepers from foreign militaries kind of coming in to help calm down the rioting that's going on in Ontario,
or something on the scale of Wonderkind,
Yeah. Oh God, that would be fun.
I don't think he's quite in contact with them specifically, but something similar to that, I guess.
You're right. That's the sort of the sorts of people you imagine he can call in favors from.
Yeah, that would also cost him a lot, I think, but he would have that in his back pocket.
He'd pay that over losing, I assume.
Yeah. Probably. That's what I think.
I guess sort of tangentially to all that is obviously the other side of this is Verona's potential new plan for replacing Charles. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on what she might be cooking up there.
Well, I think she's. I think we've heard earlier in the story about how the judges don't have to be Carmine, Aurum, Alabaster, and Sable.
Yeah.
How there are different configurations, and I think when we look at what sparked this eureka moment in Verona, the different colors she was looking at, I think she might be interested in a like full scale upheaval of the current Ontario judges. I'm not sure if she's planning on replacing all 4 of them immediately, or if she just wants to change out the Carmine role for a different one. I don't know, a cerulean or whatever the hell they're called. But
Azure.
Azure, that probably, Azure would be a good one. But
Yeah,
I think it's something on that scale.
Yeah, I think I agree. Also, I guess that begs the question: what would the Azure judge be a judge of? I guess if it's also trying to replace the Carmine and avoiding everything that's happening now. I guess.
Yeah. Instead of violence, what would you get? Yeah.
Yeah, because you need to be able to make the case for this being something that's as fundamental. Because I think what defines the judges, right, is that their domain sort of broadly covers, like an important energy in the region. So Charles, the Carmine is war, violence, like that's pretty integral to a lot of what's going on. So you need to make the case that the new position is like something as important and fundamental.
But I think we're seeing how flexible those domains are already. Like in Charles taking the dream from the Sable,
and
like that already sort of sets a precedent that those domains are kind of bullshit. They're kind of a little bit fluid, and I think he's shooting himself in the foot a little bit by making it easier to argue that point.
I guess I agree.
Same with the unforswearing Seth too. Yeah. That was meant to be the Alabaster's job, and he kind of borrowed that from her.
Yeah. So, but obviously the core part, violence, is still what the Carmine is about. So you do need a different core part, and you already have like civilization in the Aurum. So if that's not what you're going with, what are you going with? Are you going with peace instead? Are you flipping it around entirely? That sounds a bit.
Yeah, no,
that's kind of the Alabaster, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But so what conceptual space do you have in between?
If we go for like Azure, like the blue in this story has been affiliated with like Kenneth Found and Miss as the head of Kenneth Found, and then also the Blue Heron Institute, and both have almost been centered by this idea of like, I don't know what word. Walbo's probably packing some sort of word.
Learning, education,
instruction,
Or like this community would almost be one.
I think if you try to go with community, then you run into the Aurum.
Alabaster, probably.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I don't mean community, and that's I don't know what word I want, but yeah, they're both sort of, I don't know, places to explore new ideas, I guess, or like the taking parts and rebuilding them. I don't know the word, but that sort of pathy-ish thing, like what the Blue Heron also stood for was getting all of these practitioners who are in silos and uniting them to build something that was greater than the individual components, and that's almost what Kenneth Found is too.
Yeah, but there is a conceptual space there, but I'm wondering how they're going to expand on that. Because
and how do you make the pitch to because and this is also this is assuming just one. I think there's room for Verona to potentially be exploring the idea to rearrange all four of them. Like
I do have a theory on that, but that's like I'm putting that for the theory bit, because I still think that there is a little bit more going on with the judges than we've seen so far.
It would be very Verona-esque if, like, after Charles told her the judges are very tired of your shit, she decides, okay, we'll change all the judges.
I'm a bit tired of their shit too. Yeah.
Get tired of my shit, and you're fired.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I guess before we get to all those sorts of questions about theories and everything, I just want to. I forgot to throw out this fun fact in our regular episodes, but it's worth pointing out. It's of the end of Arc 18. Pale is only 100,000 words away from making the Otherverse longer than the Parahumans stories. So,
wow,
we should hit that in Arc 19.
Wild. I love that.
We're gonna be the longest and officially the bestest Wobber universe.
Yeah, soon we'll change, like, the name of the official Reddit won't be Parahumans anymore. Will be something Otherverse related, stuff like that. Yeah. Good idea.
But yeah, so I suppose moving into the questions.
Sorry, I actually wanted to add something that slipped my mind when we were talking about Master, because it's somewhat related. But I was thinking how, like the very first paragraph of the very first chapter, which is the one dealing with Master and the Lordship, etc., actually opens with like Lucy noticing like that Master is basically posing beneath like his, and I quote, stupidly huge, overly masculine statue. And I was thinking how like very much like this kind of like, machismo or like even toxic masculinity is very much something that's present in like Musser's faction. We see it especially, I think, like with Easton, and he's like when he's with Verona, and he's like, all very much like lots of like misogynistic comments, and
And that weird speech
Master
he
is
has.
great because he has babes, he has hot babes throwing himself at him, and of course we know how he ends up with what Easton. We know what Easton thinks about that even more than maybe we should have known. But anyway, but and I was thinking about that, but also obviously with Master and his idea that he has to like crush everything in his path, and he cannot like actually stop, and also like I think Anthem is a bit of a take on that too, and now essentially someone who was like suffered a huge trauma, and he decided not to actually like try to think of it, and instead his way to cope it was to throw himself into violence and become like the violence man, the man who's like good at violence essentially, without ever trying to take stock of what he's feeling or stuff like that essentially. So I thought it was interesting that we actually opened with like Lucy commenting on Master and his super hot male statue essentially.
Yeah, it's especially interesting to look at that in the framing of that you just used about Kenneth above being the status quo, about the very human status quo as an idea and then look at the prevalence of that toxic masculinity in that faction.
Yeah, I mean, Master is very much an incarnation of the patriarchy in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yes, it's essentially to the point he actually puts patriarch in his like title when he's like doing his lordship, and he's like, I'm a war mage and patriarch. Okay.
Yeah, we know what you're about.
Yeah, it's very, I guess, a mascot moment, like the bit where it's like, oh, the poor are always complaining, the rich have everything, and Lucy's like, yes, because that's what's wrong. Yes, that's it exactly.
I mean, this is the really interesting thing with Massa in the current state of things for me is it. I mean, Avery used to talk about potentially teaming up with Massa back in Arc 15, and especially now that Charles has done his shit, it feels like the wider set of practitioners teaming up with Kenneth and the others makes sense, but it's like it feels in a lot of ways like it's Massa specifically who is preventing that from happening. Like,
Yeah,
if he's gone,
if Anthem was in charge, I could see this very quick route to like Kenneth and stuff forming peace, but with Massa on top, it just feels like it's going to be impossible to get a lot more of the regular practitioners on board than it could be it would be otherwise. And I think that's what's really fun about it is the Massa side teaming up with Kenneth feels like the natural thing, but it's very specifically Massa on top that is preventing that from happening. A bit like Bristow back in the day, like as you made that comparison before. And I think like that's what's so interesting about it, is like if we could just get rid of Massa, then it feels so easy for Kenneth to team up with everyone else.
Yeah. We see this in Eloise and Elizabeth, for example, in how strongly they resisted working with Kenneth just because Massa is like this big force that they felt pulled along with.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if he's still that, if they still view him as that. I mean, in some part, I guess there's a lot of sunk cost in there.
Yeah.
But his failure in Kenneth has to have chipped away at the image his underlings have of him, right? That was already kind of something Rook was banking on way back in, what was it? The bug interlude?
Yeah.
So that's something the anti-Musser factions have been counting on for a while now. I'm just waiting to see it start paying off. I guess we see it a little bit in Macaulay switching sides and Anthem calming down. Like, it's happening, but
yeah, and I guess it's also in like the very fact that there's something of a split in like the invaders between the full-on war mages and like America, where like, we're staying here, we're keeping the fight while Musser is away, and the ones who are like, okay, maybe we should like go home and see what's happening now that everything, all else broken loose, and eventually they do leave. But yeah, it's yeah, and also especially since Masters feels like he's one of those leaders who has to like be there to rally the troops, and if he's away, people start to realize, maybe this isn't like as good a thing as isn't the great deal we were sold on, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking how there's actually a lot of Master does it, but especially it's like Angerons, like Eastern or America, where there's this split between like Kenneth is this like fundamental threat to the very existence of like practice as we know it, the seal, etc. And at the same time, oh no, this is like a silly town with like just a bump stop on our way to full victory. We're just here to throw a party and win, as America put it at one point. And like it's very, like how I think it was Umberto Eco in his like in his whole fascism article said like it's like the enemy must be at the same time both so dangerous it's a threat and so weak it's easily conquered. And obviously then there's like the reality of it all, which is slightly different.
Yeah. And on the other hand, you have Charles's faction, whose views of what their eventual goals are so very different between what we've seen of Liz and Charles. They've both offered up entirely different final worldviews, basically.
Yeah,
and it's not like they explicitly contradict each other, but it's hard to imagine both of them happening.
Yeah, and obviously, like Marissa and Edith feel a lot more kind of self-centered, with all the implications of that phrasing, in their goals. Like Marissa just wants to be a big not fairy, and Edith just wanted Matt. There wasn't that like same ideological push behind both of their joining on. But you can make the same argument of Kenneth, maybe more so back in the day than now. But like, that this was a big thing for Arc 10, I think it was, where we saw Toad Sawyer was trying to make the market. Like, there were competing ideologies within Kenneth, and while those have mostly unified, obviously we still have people like Rook sitting in here. So none of these sides is without its problems.
Yeah, but I think the core difference is that Kenneth has a way of resolving those conflicts.
Yes.
Like in a structural sense. Like a lot of Pale is political in that it is about politics and about how to organize a society and a community. And I think Kenneth has way more of a formalized structure than Muscle's faction has, where it's just the dictator on top and then his lieutenants below that, and then if you have a complaint, no, you don't have a complaint, fuck off. And Charles's faction, and Charles's faction is just a whole lot of bickering and everyone trying to pull in different directions in ways that kind of annoy each other, but they're trying to ignore the fact that they're annoying each other because it would get in the way of their plans. Of those three, I think Kenneth definitely has the healthiest way of dealing with those ideological conflicts.
Yeah. I mean, their only problem is when people go off and do shit without using that framework, like Charles, for example.
Yeah.
But that's not really Kenneth's fault.
No, it's not. But as far as Charles's faction goes, though, I'm not sure I have the best handle on what Marissa is going for at this point. I'm not entirely sure that I don't want to be a fairy anymore is the only thing she's doing. Like she said, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go.
She says that she's very glad to not be a fairy anymore. That she now doesn't have to concern herself with all those long-term, schemy bullshit. But if that's true, she also says that they're only caterpillars and they haven't, fully become butterflies yet or whatever. Like, she still has something else she's moving towards. And I don't have the best sense of what that's supposed to look like.
Yeah, because from what we saw of her in her interlude, like that was very much focused on just this framing of, her as a bit of an opposite to early story Verona, which was that sense of she didn't like what she was, and she wasn't really thinking about why or how exactly she wanted to change. She just knew she wanted to be something different, and we didn't get that insight into what that plan looked like. And you're right; it's clear that there is more to it than become a big naked goddess, but we don't know what that is, and that's really exciting, especially when we get to compare it now to someone like Verona, who is like Verona has obviously come a long way from where she was at the start of this story.
Yeah,
And this is what's
goals now.
Yeah, this is what's fun about all the culprits. Really, is that they're the mirrors of what happened to the versions of the Kenneteers that pursued the bad paths that they were kind of on before Mist stopped them. So what has Marisica come up with apart from become a big powerful goddess?
Yeah.
The closest thing I can think of to another motivation would be something along the lines of wanting to overthrow the system because of what happened to her brother. Like,
Yeah.
is she planning to make sure that the fairy courts get caught in this major upheaval that Charles is brewing?
Yeah, that's in that case. It's also kind of hard to tell because it's obvious at this point that she's still a very drunk on power, on newfound power.
Yeah.
Like she's not quite in the right mind, so it's hard to get a sense of what she's doing or where she's at. And I don't want to. I don't think that blood drunk, power hungry, whatever she is. I don't think that's just gonna fade away on its own. I think she's still planning on doing something big, even after the time skip. I'm
I
very
agree.
curious to see what the hell she's up to.
I mean, that was a bit of a what the fuck statement coming from her. The whole like, we're still the caterpillars, because I was like, wow, I thought for sure you were at least, post cocoon. You've just gone from fairy to dark blood goddess, and you still are talking about yourself in caterpillar form. Like, where are you going from here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like Edith caterpillar is shit. I get that.
Very caterpillar.
Charles and Marisica being compared to caterpillars still was very like, okay.
Yeah.
I suppose we're reaching that point now where we start to ask the questions that we ask of everyone, and I think what's going to be really fun is our first round of return guests that we're having here. We get to also compare how things might have changed for your answers.
It's exciting.
Yeah, so obviously the question, and I think both of you were late enough that you got asked this, is which Kenneth other would be your choice for familiar. So yeah, I mean, how's that? Oh, yeah, and if that's changed, why?
I think way back when I picked Liz as my choice for familiar because I had the brilliant idea that we could offer each other something. I could offer her a kind of stability in identity and give her the ability to relax a little bit and have a bit more of a solid foundation of who she is, while in exchange she could make me a bit more of a social butterfly who would have an easier time blending into new social groups and integrating myself into them. And now that I've had a better look at what integrating into social groups means for Liz, that's a bit of a different prospect now than it was then. Like,
I still think like your general idea has merit. It's Liz that's letting you down.
Yeah, exactly. I think in the end that I would stick with my choice of Liz being my choice for familiar, but it would have to be after she's relaxed some. Jesus Christ, calm the hell down. That I still think that I could offer her the thing she's actually looking for, but she would have to first admit to herself that that is something that she's looking for before that becomes at all a viable idea.
So Your answer is almost Liz, but on the condition that she sits down and sorts some shit out first.
Yeah, Liz in like 5 years. Can I say that? But on the other hand, having a city spirit for a familiar would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, because she wasn't the city spirit when you gave this answer last time, was she?
No, she wasn't. And now that she is, I mean, I'm not sure if I want to have the city spirit of Kenneth be my familiar, but the city spirit of my city as my familiar would be really fucking cool. I'd actually be kind of on board with that.
That sounds cool.
At the risk of like I'm not trying to get you to dox yourself or anything, but like I'm
it's
curious.
a trap. Don't answer.
How you would compare? Like, are you from a place that's Kennett-ish in size, or are we talking like closer to Toronto, or Thunder Bay?
That would require me to know what sizes those cities are, and I don't have a good sense of those.
That's fair.
Canada, I think like 5,000.
Yeah, but I also like those numbers aren't something I have an immediate attachment to, so I wouldn't be able to tell you without actually looking up what those numbers are.
Fair enough.
But I get the sense that my city is a little bit bigger than Canada is, so I think more akin to Thunder Bay, I guess, is what I'd say. Yeah. But I think it's a nice city, and I think it would. I think the if Liz was the city spirit of my city, I would be totally on board with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I don't know, because I was just thinking I would be like, I've just moved to a bigger city, and if I had the choice between the city spirit of here or the place I've come from, which probably not likely to happen for a number of reasons, but like I'd almost prefer a smaller one, just because it feels like you could work more than like I'm thinking if there was like the Sydney city spirit, that's going to be a whole lot.
Yeah, that sounds overwhelming.
Yeah, that's too much. And even here, I think this place is about 500,000 people or something, and it's just like that's too much to deal with. I want a small, if I can't drive from one end to the other in 10 minutes, then like it's too much to deal with.
I'll quickly look up how many people live in my city, real quick, to see.
And also tell us about the spirit of your street and your house number as well while we're here. And
thank you.
What about the spirit of
your mother's
bank account? Yeah.
No, I think the city. I think the city I'm in is like 200,000 people, 300,000. So relatively small as far as cities go. Yeah. So I think that's okay. I think I can work with that. I've lived in cities like London, England, and that would have been way too much.
Yeah,
thank you. But where I live now, that's fine. I can work with that. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, Lapsed. I've forgotten who you gave as your answer last time.
I chose. If I remember correctly, which is not always certain, it was Montague. I think I chose last time.
That's right.
Yeah, mostly because I thought it would be fun, and I mean, he's still a fun guy. But I have to admit, and I know it will sound like I'm like copying Mega now, but after I read this interlude, I decided, you know what? I guess it's probably dangerous. She's probably one of those familiars who would like scheme against me or something. But I wouldn't mind Liz as my familiar because her whole thing is actually pretty cool. So I'm very superficial like that. No, but also I guess living dangerously. But I think I prefer more Liz. Not in the town spirit stuff, more in the original like doppelganger part more than anything else, which was like what I found very interesting. Which I guess being the town spirit is mostly an extension of that, but mostly I guess most also for like the power levels and avoiding like to be completely dominated by my familiar or something like that. Also because my city, my town I live, it's actually pretty sucky, so I wouldn't want to be tied to my spirit anyway.
That's fair.
But yes, I guess also I guess it was more for many of the reasons as Mega, maybe it would make me more like a social butterfly, melding a bit with like people around instead of being a bit of my own, as is more of my want, I guess.
Yeah. No, I definitely see the appeal there.
Yeah.
And what about you two? Have you changed your minds?
Hold on. That's not how this works.
Yeah, what you got to host your own podcast. Get us to come onto it if you want to ask us stuff.
Listen. You You two also always answer the who's the best Kenneteer question, so I think you need to answer this one too.
I actually don't know that we. I think we've
We must
not
have
answered that
this
a bunch.
before.
We've skipped. I think that's because usually we're very consistent. I think I'm almost always Verona and
Yes.
Ruben's almost always Lucy. So
And I definitely am after this arc. That anthem part was fucking fire.
I think I might have talked about this in our Lost episode, but I think there have been times. I think there have been arcs recently where I might have answered Avery, but definitely after starting arc 19, I'm fully back on Verona.
But about
Yeah.
familiars.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've talked about this on the podcast, so I'm not really memeing. I genuinely think Biscuit would be a contender.
Yeah, I would pick a goblin too. Probably Toady though.
Yeah, Toad is a good choice.
But yeah, I mean, the other question, as we've talked about, is who is the best Kenneteer? Do you each remember who you picked last time?
Yes.
Yes.
It was Lucy for me, and it's been Lucy for a long time.
Nice,
and
good on you.
As Ruben also already said, this arc definitely, I feel like that's one of the arcs that would convince someone who didn't have Lucy as their best choice, their best Kenneteer choice, who would convince them to switch to Lucy. So yeah, Lucy.
Yeah, it used to be Verona for me, and it absolutely still is Verona, because I have to say that some of the judges are a little sick of your shit line, which just absolutely sent me and was like, yes, that's exactly why I love Verona, because that's exactly the kind of shit she pulled. On top of that, I just like I already discussed, I just really like where she's headed as a character this arc, because I kind of wanna answer this on the basis of whose story I found most interesting this arc, and as far as that goes, I think Verona's new friend group and her acting as suddenly the adult one kind of in that friend group, like she's the one that has a house and she's the one that's offering to lend clothes to her new friends and that sort of thing. Like she's suddenly kind of the responsible one in that friend group, and she's dealing with that in a very Verona way. But I'm really enjoying it. I think I like where she's headed a lot, and that's why I'm also picking her as my my best Kenneteer of the arc.
Perfect. Well, geez, Avery sure drew the short straw.
Yeah,
for this episode, huh?
Which is weird because she had some really cool moments this arc. Like,
yeah, she had the goat.
Yeah, she had the goat of goats.
I mean, that's the thing. When we say one of them's our favorite Kenneteer, what we're saying is that the other one's a trash tier.
Yeah, they suck. We just don't want anything to do with them at all.
Yeah,
we would prefer their chapters to just not show up anymore, obviously.
I'm trying to remember because we did talk about this a bit in the Lost episode last week, and the White Duke was here for that one, which is part of why it hurts that he couldn't make it here tonight. And I think he picked Verona as well. I want to say so.
Yeah, that does sound like the White Duke's choice.
Yeah,
worrying a bit.
So yeah, poor Avery copping it hard this arc, but I'm sure a bird will be back at some point to rectify
yell at Anne some more next time.
Actually, I do have a variation on the theme of this question, which is your favorite like Kenneteer's Ethan personified from the last interlude?
Oh yeah, we have 10 new ones.
Yeah, I feel like they were all iconically their Kenneteer to me, but I found it hard to be like, oh, this is a trait of Witch Hat as opposed to, a cat, for example.
I think that was there. It's just been more than 2 days, which means I can't remember them all enough to answer it. Unfortunately, we missed the brief window in which my shitty memory would allow me to answer this question.
I think my favorite was Shadow Cloak, like Verona's cape, in part because she was still exactly as nerdy as Verona always is, but she was the most subdued one, and I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Shadow Cloak was like the Verona that kept sort of just standing in the background, Batmanly.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So, something else that we usually take the opportunity to do during these reflecting episodes is reflect a bit on the meaning of the arc now that we've finished it. Wild Abandon. Does anything jump out to us as relevant about the meanings of this arc title?
I'll just quickly do the definition, which is, to do something with wild abandon is to do something like rash or impulsive, but you do it kind of, with enthusiasm. So yeah, just doing something crazy, but you got your heart in it.
Yeah.
I'll start with one of the obvious
Hmm.
ones, which obviously this arc opened with Massa abandoning his claim on Kenneth. Yeah.
And then leaving everyone else to run wild inside of it, especially
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
I mean, Charles obviously turned the province into a wild place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as well Lucy's decision to fight Anthem was
Yes.
had rash, unrestrained impulsiveness, enthusiasm, or zeal, as you said.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess lots of people got abandoned this arc. It was from Liberty, from Anthem to
Yeah,
Mercer's
true.
followers. And I guess, yeah, also like Charles, monsters, others like spreading wilderness, civilization becoming like isolated pockets, getting abandoned. It's also the idea too, and of course all these others acting with like wild abandon in their like, oh, we can eat people and kill people and all of that.
Yeah. And take over payphones.
Yeah. The most heinous of crimes.
Yeah, bringing payphones back actually is the terrible thing.
Jesus Christ.
That did. But yeah, obviously, I think that name also ties perfectly into something we've already talked about a lot, which is that way this arc dealt a lot with, like your interaction with the environment that you're in. Like obviously, the term "wild" in this story has primarily been used for wild practitioners, which are people who come from outside the system, and abandon obviously ties in a lot with people like Anthem and just the general sense of like how an environment embraces you or vice versa.
Yeah. And there's also a bit of like letting go of control as a theme throughout this arc, especially in Liz, obviously, who refuses to. But also when Miss talks about being a bit of a control freak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also in trying to let go in, being the one in charge of everything in Kenneth found, at least a little bit.
I guess you might also be able to fit like Edith and Matthew's like final scene together as a bit to the theme. Like Edith finally realizes she's been like abandoned by everyone, I guess, including her own like the people she thought were like her partners in crime, don't really care about her. And she's left outside her house, so I guess she's also in the wild.
But yeah, and so I guess now it is time for the bold and specific predictions. The heading that we've got here is kind of what's the end game for the story now, but I mean any bold or specific prediction is acceptable.
And also as far as endgame goes, we've been fooled before.
Yeah, I was talking about that. Well,
But mine is, I still don't trust the Alabaster. Like, technically the Alabaster is the role that is at the most danger of being attacked and replaced. And yet, the Alabaster, though, has been in place the longest out of all of them. She's been pushing things this way and that. And as the judge of mercy, I find her to sometimes be a little bit lacking in that department.
Yeah.
In ways that have me questioning what the story is doing with her. So I think at some point she's going to become a major antagonist. That's my prediction.
I can see that because like my read on her sort of incompetence and longevity essentially boils down to my takeaway from her interlude was that she prioritizes the status quo and her own well-being over everything else, like in this is very shitty way. So it makes sense that if Verona starts talking about significantly altering the way the judges work, and that affects the Alabaster at all, I can see her really starting to push back just because she seems anti
Shame.
stuff.
Yeah. We're asking more and more what the judges do and what we want them to be doing in this story. Like they're getting more and more scrutiny placed upon them, and I don't think the Alabaster is going to come out of that looking good. So
no, well, yeah. I mean, the thing from her interlude was it was kind of the reason that she's lasted so long as an Alabaster. My interpretation was it's because she's kind of a shit one. Like she said, oh yeah, all these other Alabasters get weak because they spend all their power doing their job and being merciful, and I make sure I'm not really that merciful, so I've got enough power. And it's like, okay, so you just suck.
It's been a while since I last read that, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
What about the Sable? Where do we sit on the Sable as an extension of that? Because
I kind of like
I
this.
thought he was kind of cool for a bit
Yes,
there,
yeah.
but then he gave Charles the dreams.
Yeah, which is actually interesting because like I can see like the Alabaster as also about what you said, just like letting Charles take whatever he wants because she doesn't really care about it. But like the Sables has seemed more into his job in a way, like I guess. So I felt like it'd be more like it'd be more resistant to just give pieces of his jurisdiction to Charles, even if it's like part of how the system works, I guess. We also don't, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, the Sable always seemed like someone who is very much a sticker for the rules and for the procedures.
Yeah, that's true.
And now I'm curious indeed, because he did give that up to Charles. Is it because is it because Charles actually made a good argument for why it should be his instead of the Sable's? Because is the Sable's claim on Dream that good to start with? Maybe not, and maybe that's why Charles had an easy time of it, but it's still something I'm curious about, because I think the Sable is the one who takes being a judge the most seriously.
I agree.
Yeah, and he was like the leader of the John recruitment movement, which was another tick in his column for me, because, obviously we weren't happy about John getting the role, but also John was the best choice. So like it was a good move. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I was really disappointed when Charles came into the dream, because he'd mentioned, "Oh, I'll ask the Sable," and part of me was like, "Well, the Sable's the cool one, so hopefully that won't go well." And then it did, and I'm like,
Of course,
"What the hell, bro?"
Of course, the Sable is also the one who like screwed the pooch with all making sure Yalda was actually dead. So which started this whole mess. So I guess it's not perfect.
Yeah. So Lapsed, what have you got for us in terms of bold and specific predictions?
Okay, I guess we already talked a bit about like the whole what's Verona's plan, which I guess I could have slotted in here instead of like discussing it. So I sounded like I had my prediction already there. But so instead, I guess I'll do like a very small, I guess even silly prediction, because I'm drawing a bit of a blank on more serious one, honestly. And so I'll say that since we saw like that Anne is starting to like awaken her daughter, and we saw that like the only bit of like personality we saw of her daughter was that she's very excited about like escape rooms and gifts from escape rooms. And since she'll probably start to practice soon, and there's in Thunder Bay there's like a very young new practitioner whose practice is essentially like giant escape rooms with cool prizes. I'm saying Avery will teach her some Finder stuff, and that will piss Anne off very much.
Yeah, Avery was also the one. The first, I think, the first one Tiny Ann heard not kowtowing to her mom.
Yeah,
and that's gonna spark something inside her mind. That's wait, people can talk like that to my mom. That's what?
Although Tiny Ann was the one who called what Avery was wearing deplorable. What was it?
Yeah, but that she was kind of prompted by her mom to say that. I think a lot of that is her knowing what she needs to say to make her mom happy. But
that's definitely a valid read. Yeah,
which might be more complicated once she's bound to the truth. Actually,
yeah, exactly.
I will just because I'm a huge fan of the trope of like the snobby, mean, bully, rich kid gets turned good. Like, it's definitely a trope in like a lot of children's or teen shows and stuff, and I'm always a fan of that, so I'm behind this.
Yeah, and it was also funny that Anne was proud of her daughter for saying something Anne wanted to hear, even though she was clearly lying when she said it. I forgot exactly what it was, but it was so clear that she didn't really believe it and was just saying it because it was what Anne wanted to hear. And I think she might go places if she awakens and gets to talk with Avery like one or two more times without her mom being present.
Oh, that'd be so good. Just as a fuck you to Anne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd support it.
Always support a fuck you to Anne.
Exactly.
Fucking Thunder Bay. Jesus Christ. Oh.
Yeah, it's always popcorn time when you see the Thunder Bay Council gather together.
Oh, they're such idiots. I love them so much.
I think we talked about this in the last episode, but just that whole moment where like they came out of the goat and they all started bickering over who should get the goat was great. But the cherry on top was really the way Thea was looking at Avery, like, what did you think was going to happen? Well, like she was any better? Like, I love the vibe of her being like, we could have stopped this by just giving it to me. She's like, that's the same shit, Thea. Like, you must see that it's the same.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think we talked about that last week too, but like we talk a lot of shit about Charles's plans, but the goat was a fantastic plan. It's the one plan of his that I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. This is a good villain plan. I love it.
It is a good one, isn't it?
But it's
Yeah.
also the one that we think Marissa helped him come up with. So
That's fair, but it's still the only plan of his that I think has actual style, you know. Because I think you pointed at that time that it's very much a parody of the whole obsession with bloodlines.
yeah.
And at the same it's that, and at the same time it's also a golden apple thrown right into the midst of them, and they all just completely fall for it, and it's so fantastic. Oh,
Well, and it's that great kind of manipulation because I think like even when you tell them
Yeah.
that's the plan, like you still fall for it. Like that's the best kind of manipulation is even when you know it's manipulation, you still can't help but be tempted by it. It's like it's designed to make us fight. But like I could do so much with it though.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it also in the last episode, but one of the best things about the plan, which is great, is also how, like, it also Charles actually had to tell Avery to basically go and and set it off because, and he was like very maybe go and look about Franklin or goat. Ooh. So stupid.
I think the other thing as well, in terms of the HOA vibes of Thunder Bay, the thing that really sort of jumped out to me was towards the end, as much as like Avery was kicking ass, like standing up to Anne and stuff, there's very much the vibe of like she's being drawn in. And I think that's what's great about this HOA dramery vibe is if you try to engage with them at all, they bring you down to their level. So like when Anne was trying to say stuff about the goat, Avery was chiming in and correcting her as like self-appointed leader and like sort of trying to undermine her. And on the one hand, it's great to see Avery do that, but on the other hand, it feels like her just sliding into this same dipshit rhythm that the rest of them are on. Like there's no way to engage here and come out not looking like an idiot as well.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a line in early Pact where somebody says the thing about dealing with goblins is they drag you down to their level, and I think that applies even more strongly to the Thunder Bay Council.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also like I like that's a bit of an epilogue to like the old goat thing. I like how like it's I think still in the Anne section of the interlude where she manages to get the parting shot, like I guess what she thinks is like the last blow, and she's like, oh, also we're rotating who keeps care of the goat, so now it's your turn. And everybody's like, I live in an apartment, how can I keep a goat? And I'm sure someone as resourceful as you can find a way. It's so great.
They're so terrible. I love them
It
so
is
much.
ridiculous, isn't it?
Keep it safe on a path. Fuck, that'd be funny, and then just leave it there. You know, it turns out it's safe. Let's just keep it on that path.
I hope the wolf doesn't get it.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our notes. Does anyone have anything else they want to mention before we wrap up?
No.
Biscuit, best goblin.
All right, great. Well, thank you both for joining us again
pleasure.
for the third time, if we count the last episode.
2.5.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. The other episode available soon in Verona's bookshop.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
No worries. You're more than welcome. Do we have anything that you want to plug?
Well, I occasionally write essays on the subreddit, which you may have read the one that I did at the end of Ark 17. And I also do my live reads on the Doof Media Discord.
Yeah.
So feel free to check those out too.
Cool. All right, folks. Well, yeah, thanks for joining us. So yeah, if you want great live reads, you can check them out on the Discord, which you can find at duffmedia.com/Discord. If you want terrible things, you can find them on our Twitter, which is at PaleReflectCast. Each and every day we post memes. Let's just call them. I'm not going to assign them a qualitative.
Yeah, let's be generous and just call them memes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you're done reading Megafire's insightful essays and you think, well, I've used my brain up for today, then you flip on over to our Twitter and it's brain free zone.
Yep. If you want to check out more of the shows on the Duff Media Network, you can head to duffmedia.com and find more details there. All the other great shows and all kinds of fun activities and games if you find them.
Yep. And don't forget about our Patreon, patreon.com/duffmedia. That's why we are able to make this show and why all those other shows exist too. I don't know that this show or Pale in Comparison would still exist without it.
Yes, and of course, while you're on Patreon, make sure you check out Wildbow's Patreon as well at patreon.com/Wildbow.
He made this wonderful environment that is nurturing us all in this story, and now you need to pay your taxes.
The important message of Pale: pay your goddamn taxes.
That's the core theme.
Yeah.
All right, folks, catch you around.